So I'm Emmet McNamee. I'm one of the heads of stewardship at the Principles for Responsible Investment. I lead our Active Ownership 2.0 program, which is our initiative to try and encourage more investors to integrate sustainability outcomes into their stewardship practices. This initiative began about 3 years ago, mostly out of a recognition that many investor stewardship practices were currently falling short. There was an excessive focus on both either achieving improved disclosure at investee companies, which is important, but it's not an end in itself. And there was also maybe not an excessive focus on idiosyncratic risk, but an exclusive focus on idiosyncratic risk to the exclusion of systemic issues. And so the Active Ownership 2.0 program was created to, I guess, sharpen investor awareness of the risks that systemic issues pose to their portfolios and the crucial role in stewardship and collective action in tackling those. Stewardship has historically focused on alpha, and we need to focus more on beta, which is seen as a greater source of investment returns over the long term anyway. There are a couple of key areas where we think significant progress still needs to be made. One of those areas is the role of asset owners in investor stewardship. I think on the good news side is that asset owners are increasingly appreciative of stewardship as important and are increasingly asking their asset managers questions about what their stewardship practices are and how they can improve. But I think a challenge is that asset owners perhaps have not yet sufficiently widely gained the sophistication and granularity that is necessary to effectively hold their managers account on stewardship questions and don't necessarily articulate well enough what good looks like from their perspective. And in addition, even where that knowledge is present, it's subordinated to other factors which are seen as more important, things like cost, things like the investment selection process. And so as a result, even while awareness and favorability to stewardship is growing among asset owners, there isn't yet enough ownership of it and preparedness to draw red lines around it. Another area where there are maybe currently shortcomings is around investors' approach to escalation and voting, and perhaps in particular their role in assessing boards of directors at investee companies. I think what we've seen progress very fast in the last few years is investor support for ESG shareholder proposals. And a big part of the reason for that is that asset owners care about this. This has become a sort of metric against which they judge their asset managers increasingly. I mean, as a metric, blunt support for ESG shareholder proposals isn't the most sophisticated. I mean, there's a vast variety in quality of those ESG shareholder proposals, but it still, I think, overall marks an improvement. ESG shareholder proposals has been like the kind of marker of quality, mixed marker for quality, but marker for quality that asset owners have been using. I think perhaps the next frontier or the next marker of quality that we're likely to see is in how investors are approaching board elections, and investors are already increasingly stating their willingness to vote against boards of directors at companies where there are problems with the environmental and social performance. And again, this is very welcome. This is pretty critical, I would say, because you can have the best ESG shareholder proposal in the world, but ultimately you need both a committed and a competent board to oversee and implement that. Now, that being said, I think there are also still areas in which investors' approach to board accountability, board composition could improve. It's currently rather reactive and rather signaling. So when an investor when an ESG-related controversy has taken place, investors are more prepared to vote against board members. Where there is serious laggard behavior, like a failure to complete TCFD disclosures for companies where climate is a material issue, there's also preparedness to vote against directors in those instances. But there's much less willingness by investors to be proactive in determining, what is an ESG competent board. If there is an ESG risk that is material to that company, what is the level of skills that you should expect from board members to be able to deal with that? And what is investors' role in, proactively shaping that board? And so, the high watermark for this, and what's got a lot of people interested in, is the proxy fight that occurred at ExxonMobil last year. And I think many investors were excited about this because this was a way to significantly change a company's strategy, bring on ESG competent board members, and reduce the buildup of systemic risk in their portfolios. The problem with that, though, is that the particular circumstances of that intervention by this particular hedge fund are unlikely to replicate themselves that often in the future, and so investors shouldn't sort of wait around for these kind of white knights to roll in and offer them a simple opportunity which they can just vote for or against on. Investors are going to have to take more responsibility of this on themselves and evaluate boards, is there sufficient competency on this board? Are there sufficient skills in this board? And where that's not the case, be prepared to get involved in one way or another in the nomination process. That is, significantly more resource intensive. It's not going to be an approach that investors take at every company, but investors have to realize that, in an economy like ours, which is significantly misaligned with, planetary thresholds, with global goals, then it's going to take essentially more than just passively voting for or against to shift that trajectory. So there are two main issues. One issue is with a fear. Fear is maybe a strong word, but a reluctance by investors to damage relationships that they have with investee companies, and so. Until very recently, even supporting shareholder proposals against management's wishes was seen as a largely no-go area for many investors unless there was a significant problem. It was seen as a very strong escalation tool that would reduce the willingness of management to engage. That has changed with shareholder proposals, but directors still falls in that remit. It's seen as a sort of a personal thing, and if I vote against this director, will that damage my chances at getting access to senior people at the company? So work is needed, and a sort of culture sentiment shift is needed on this as well. The second barrier, I think, has to do more with scalability, in that I don't think there's an easy way to evaluate boards at scale, automate this, have some simple ESG rating that can tell you which companies have boards that are not well equipped to deal with future risks, and which board members in particular are the ones that need to go, and who do you replace them with. So this is hard, resource intensive work, and it's hard to tell how this is going to happen. I'm convinced that it does need to happen. I'm just not sure. I think there's a role for groups like PRI and like ESG data providers to start looking at this a bit more and to providing relevant research. But ultimately it's going to require much more granularity and resources than is often deployed at stewardship at the moment.